The demilitarized zone. 2:14 in the morning. A North Korean reconnaissance drone drifts south across the border, exactly the kind of low-level provocation that has happened dozens of times over the past decade and always ended the same way: tracked, ignored, forgotten by morning. This time, a South Korean air defense battery near Paju locks on and fires. The drone goes down in a field 2 kilometers south of the line. Pyongyang's response comes within the hour, and it is nothing like the calibrated, deniable provocations of the past decade. It is not a statement. It is not a warning shot. It is the opening barrage of an artillery bombardment that has clearly been prepared and waiting for a justification, not provoked by one. 800 pieces of North Korean artillery, dug into positions along the DMZ that have not moved in 70 years, open fire simultaneously on Seoul. The city is 35 miles from the border. It has always been 35 miles from the border. Every South Korean defense plan for the last half-century has accounted for exactly this scenario, and none of that preparation makes the next 4 minutes any less catastrophic. Shells land across Seoul's northern districts before most of the city's 10 million residents are even awake. Apartment blocks. A hospital in Goyang. The reservoir supplying half the city's drinking water. South Korean counter-battery radar identifies the firing positions within 90 seconds. Return fire begins within 3 minutes. It does not matter. The damage in a city of 10 million people is not measured in minutes. It is measured in the fact that the bombardment happened at all. President's Blue House convenes an emergency session before dawn. The order for full mobilization is signed before the sun rises over a burning capital. 28,500 American soldiers are stationed in South Korea on the morning this begins, and every base near the DMZ takes damage in the opening barrage, not because the United States is a target of choice, but because Camp Humphreys and Osan Air Base sit within North Korean artillery range by simple geography, and North Korea has never distinguished between Korean and American positions when the shooting starts. Washington does not deliberate. The Mutual Defense Treaty signed in 1953 has exactly one interpretation when Seoul is under bombardment and American soldiers are already taking casualties. Within 2 hours, U.S. Forces Korea Command authorizes strikes on identified North Korean artillery positions. American F-16s and South Korean F-15Ks fly the first joint sorties before breakfast. North Korean armor moves through the DMZ at first light, exploiting the chaos of the bombardment exactly as North Korean military doctrine has planned for decades. Soviet-era T-62 tanks, alongside newer indigenous designs, push through pre-cleared minefield corridors that North Korean engineers have maintained in secret for this exact moment. The invasion force is smaller than Cold War estimates once projected. North Korea's military has aged, and much of its equipment is decades behind modern standards. But numbers and geography still favor the attacker in the first critical hours, when defenders are still absorbing the shock of the initial bombardment rather than fully repositioning. South Korean forward divisions, dug into defensive positions built and rebuilt since the armistice, absorb the initial armored push and hold. Barely. By noon, the war has a second front. Not created by North Korea, but by the country every strategist in Seoul and Washington has been watching since the first shell landed. China moves troops to the Yalu River border within 6 hours of the first bombardment, not into North Korean territory, and not in coordination with Pyongyang, but in a deployment Beijing describes only as ensuring stability and preventing refugee flow across its border. No one in Washington or Seoul believes that is the entire explanation, and no one can prove otherwise. Chinese forces do not fire a shot. They simply exist, in large numbers, exactly where any South Korean or American counteroffensive toward the Yalu would eventually have to operate. It is enough to change the calculation. Any push deep into North Korean territory now risks a confrontation with Chinese forces that nobody in Washington wants to trigger, and every South Korean and American commander knows it. Japan, watching a war unfold on its nearest continental neighbor, activates its self-defense forces to full alert status and offers immediate basing and logistics support for American reinforcements flowing through Okinawa and mainland Japanese airbases. It is the largest activation of Japanese military assets since the end of the Second World War, authorized within a single emergency session of the Diet. By day 3, American carrier strike groups from the 7th Fleet arrive off the Korean coast. South Korean and American ground forces, reinforced and repositioned, begin a methodical counteroffensive to push North Korean forces back across the original line of contact, not beyond it, not toward Pyongyang, constrained deliberately by the silent Chinese presence at the Yalu that nobody has to mention twice in any planning session. Seoul, meanwhile, is still burning in places, still counting its dead, still absorbing sporadic artillery fire from North Korean positions that counter-battery strikes have not yet fully silenced. By day 5, the counteroffensive reaches the original DMZ line and stops. Exactly there. Not because North Korean resistance is unbroken, its forward divisions are shattered, its air force effectively destroyed in the opening 72 hours of American and South Korean air operations, but because pushing further means testing exactly how serious China's presence at the Yalu actually is, and nobody in Washington or Seoul is willing to find out by accident. Inside North Korea, the political calculation is entirely different from the military one. A regime that staked its legitimacy on a war it can no longer win faces a question with no good answer. Continue a bombardment campaign that accomplishes nothing but drawing further American and South Korean retaliation, or seek terms before the military situation inside North Korea itself becomes impossible to control. The back-channel contact comes through Beijing on day 6, not through any direct line between Pyongyang and Seoul. China, having spent 6 days as a silent, undeclared limit on how far the war could expand, positions itself as the party that can end it, a role that leaves Beijing with more influence over the peninsula's future than it had before a single shell was fired. A ceasefire is signed on day 8, restoring the original line of control, leaving both Koreas essentially where they started geographically, and leaving Seoul to rebuild from the worst attack the city has suffered since 1953. Nothing about the underlying standoff is resolved. The artillery is still there. The border is still there. The only thing that has changed is that everyone on the peninsula now has a much clearer answer to a question they had spent decades hoping never to test. What do you think? Could a second Korean War actually stay this contained, or would it eventually pull in every power in the region? Drop your answer below. Subscribe for more what-if scenarios.